This is my first time doing a reading at night, which is kind of fun. Although it's only 5:30, it's just dark because of winter. In 10 minutes, I have to go stir my I'm gonna have to pause to go stir my onions because I'm currently browning onions for I saw one of those like Instagram reels when you're scrolling of sped up recipes, and it really intrigued me. It was French onion soup, but with noodles. Like it was a pasta, French onion soup pasta. I don't know. It just really spoke to me. So that's what I'm making currently. But you have to browning onions takes so long. So I've been at it for a while. Um, there was a so the 99% Invisible, the podcast, great podcast. They are doing the Robert Caro, the Power Broker series, and their episode about the first 90-ish pages came out yesterday, but I haven't listened to it because I'm only on page 77. But I feel like I might just do a long one today, and then I'll be caught up. I think that's what I'm gonna do because I didn't do yesterday. Sorry, I just am blabbering. I don't think that's very helpful. But whatever. Okay. Also, I don't know if you can see her in the back, but my cat is like making biscuits dutifully. There she is, looking like a little demon. Okay, well, without further ado, more power broking. Moses also had where we were. I can't even remember what was happening before, but he was starting out at that job. He was at the job being like a check on the city of New York, and then he left that job even though they didn't really like him that much there. He kind of got like a promotion to work in an actual city appointed, like to work with an appointee. Okay, that's what I remember. Moses also had confidence that his system would be adopted. It would take courage and integrity to push it through, he said, but the city at last had a mayor with such qualities, and with an educational background that would enable him to understand that the service was good and that its adoption would so improve the civil service as to make it truly an instrument for the betterment of the lives of the city's people. Moses talked often about Mitchell, the young mayor. The young mayor was his beau ideal of the public servant, the embodiment of the virtues enumerated in the PhD thesis. And certainly, the first reactions to Moses's detailed report must have made the confidence seem justified. Terming it pioneer work, the Civil Service Reform Association said that Moses's efficiency rating system was the most thorough ever devised. Moskowitz called it an epic in the administration of civil service law. James said, "No city, state, or national civil service has anything commensurate with this." Mayor Mitchell announced that he would push for the system's adoption. Bella and Emmanuel, his parents, had purchased 19 acres of land in Lake Placid, Hawk Island, for a summer retreat, and had been up there for more than a month. Now, his report finished and praised, their son hurried to join them for what was to be a golden summer. He felt very close to attaining a goal in which was tied up all the idealism of his youth, the accomplishment of a concrete achievement that would truly help people. And now his attention was focused on the girl who seemed somehow a part of that idealism. Bob was very much in love that summer, a friend recalls. We did a lot of swimming and mountain climbing in the Adirondacks, but Bob was talking about Mary all the time. He brought her up to meet his parents, and Bella liked her immediately. On August 15, 1915, 1 month after he had handed in the report, he and Mary were married. The ceremony was performed at the non-sectarian Labor Temple in New York City by its director, a Presbyterian minister, and the couple honeymooned in a rustic camp near Lake Placid. Okay, sorry to interrupt, but if I don't find out the answer to this, I'm gonna die. I need to confirm that she's not actually 35 years older than he was. Somebody last time commented that they don't mind if I just yabber about random things, and thank you for that comment because I've really taken it to heart. I've been upping my chatter. Okay, Robert Moses. I'm looking him up on the Wikipedia app right now. Let's see. One thing about the Wikipedia app that's a big a big bummer in my opinion is that it's really hard to like skip to different sections. Like I don't want to read all I want is the personal life, which is going to be at the bottom probably. Man, this is really not easy to find actually. There's a lot of talk about like where Wikipedia can incorporate large language models, and a lot of people are fairly opposed to having AI write content. But I really do think that like navigability could be improved a lot by like if I could just type in like I don't want the ChatGPT answer, I just want the Wikipedia answer, but like bring me to it more quickly. That would be helpful because I can't find his wife in this article. And I can't control F because I'm on my stupid phone. All right, well, this was kind of a... Never mind. I guess we don't know how old she was. Sorry to do that. I'm going to just look it up on my computer, I guess. Okay. Personal life. Oh, he just doesn't have a personal life section. Huh. Okay, wife. What? There's nothing in this article about his marriage? Mary? That's crazy. There's nothing in the Wikipedia article about his wife. That's the reason I couldn't find it. Maybe I'll have to fix that. I feel like that's relatively important info. Returning to New York in the fall, the couple moved into a small apartment on 95th Street near West End Avenue. They had no regular income except Mary's salary at the bureau, and before the end of the year, they knew that she was pregnant. A daughter, Barbara, would be born on May 23, 1916, and she would have to stop working. But Bella said she would give them enough to get by on. She didn't want Robert to interrupt his work by taking a paying job. Oh, I forgot, he's still not making any salary. That's crazy. Neither Mary nor Bob had much interest in the things that force other young couples to be concerned with money. Anyway, they were perfectly happy. For example, to furnish their living room with only Bella's old sofas and their own shiny idealism. Every morning, early, Moses would get on a call from a young lawyer named George Gove, who lived nearby. "I'm leaving," Gove would say, and hang up. Moses would be standing in the street when Gove arrived. Sounds like a drug deal. Together, the two men would walk down Broadway all the way to the Flatiron Building on 23rd Street, where Gove had his office, and then Moses would continue alone to the Municipal Building, some 6 miles south of 95th Street. What? Gove was a tall, raw-boned farmer's son from Wisconsin who regarded himself as a good walker, but he had trouble keeping up with Moses. As they walked, Moses would talk, and as his thoughts raced, his legs seemed to keep pace, so that at times he was almost trotting in his eagerness to get downtown. "We talked about everything under the sun," Gove recalls, "art, philosophy, history. The one subject not mentioned was one other young man might dwell on, making money. He just wasn't interested in that," Gove said. The subject that dominated the talk was government, and particularly the government of New York City. He was all caught up in his work, Gove said. Moses was sure the work was going to pay off. Historians call those last years before America's entry into the Great War America's age of optimism. It was Bob Moses's age of optimism, too. His superiors couldn't praise him enough and took his advice eagerly. When, during a speech, they were asked a particularly sticky question, Moses would lean forward and whisper the answer. They had authorized the printing of detailed forms on which the arithmetical grades were to be reported, and in the rectangles of heavy yellow paper, Moses could see the first tangible results of his years of education for public service. Forms had already been sent to several of the more cooperative departments, and the rest were in boxes stacked in a corner of one of the Civil Service Commission offices, ready to go. Okay, I'm gonna quick stir around my my onions that are in the pan. Sorry for the disruption. They look so good. Ugh, okay. I'm starting another timer, doing a little stir. They look so good. Let me show. Okay, my stove, I really need to clean it, but that's That's onions right now. All right. Okay, great. Back to the book. Oh, another thing I need to do, I really need to plug in my computer. Sorry, I'm not prepared at all for this right now. This is my worst live stream yet. I'm so sorry. You have to forgive me. I don't even know where I put my computer charger. Here it is. Hello. Okay. Moses' demeanor revealed his confidence. Openly mocking the weekly staff luncheons and elaborate filing systems, he made no secret of his contempt for the Bureau. Chatting with Bureau staffers, he took care to let them know, in a studied, offhand fashion, that it was fine to be doing real work at last. He carried himself with an air of vast knowledge. Quote, there was, in his makeup, very little doubt, one of the staffers was to say years later. Another recalls that Moses was the first person he saw on the first day at the Bureau. Here was this tall, handsome character in a white suit, a summer tropical kind of suit, and he was talking on the telephone to the street cleaning commissioner. I gathered from the conversation that someone had been advocating some new method of cleaning the streets, and the commissioner was saying that he didn't think much of the suggestion. And all of a sudden, this character in the white suit raps out, well, we don't think much of it either. You should have heard the tone. It was so definite. I thought it was an extraordinary tone for a guy to use who had never been confronted with the problem. I sized him up immediately as self-confident, opinionated, and critical. End quote. Getting to know Moses, the new staffer found no reason to change his evaluation. He seemed to regard himself as one of the anointed, he said. But reality was just around the corner. Tammany's wild old Sachems, S-A-C-H-E-M-S, don't know what that means, had probably realized early what Moses' plan would mean for them. It would effectively destroy their control over civil service. But the Sachems, unwilling, S-A-C-H-E-M-S, I don't know what that is. I hope that's not like a really basic word, and I hope I'm not revealing myself to be really dumb. It means a chief, and it's a word that comes from North American Indian peoples, or like a boss or leader, mafia Sachem. Okay, I don't feel bad for not knowing that. But the Sachems, unwilling openly to oppose reform themselves, had said nothing, biding their time. And now, oh hello, I'm glad you didn't know either. And now, the development which they had been waiting for was coming to pass. The system's 50,000 members were beginning to realize what the plan would mean for them. Robert Moses introduced a new plan so that all the city workers, the public service people in New York City, they get graded on a bunch of metrics so that the people that are doing a bad job get kicked out more easily. Yeah. The downgrading of seniority in Moses' system would mean that these city employees would lose a large advantage, in many cases their only advantage, over bright young outsiders trying for their jobs. The elimination of unnecessary jobs would mean that some of them would be out of work entirely. Moses' insistence on demotion for men who failed to score high enough on new examinations to qualify for the jobs they presently held would have the most far-reaching effects of all. Men who had run their ward bosses' errands for years in return for advancement up the civil service ladder now came to realize that under Moses' system, the rewards for which they had waited for so long might be snatched from them. In fact, for many of them, might was only a euphemism. They knew all too well what their qualifications were and how they would make out on honestly run examinations. Moreover, Moses' system would effectively bar the simplest plan to future raises. Under the old system, once a civil service worker reached grade 5, the highest grade for clerical employees, he could be given raises without limit as to number or amount, without having to take any examinations at all. All that was necessary was approval from his department head. And since department heads gave raises on the advice of Tammany bosses, the loyal party worker could be assured that his loyalty would be rewarded. Grade 5 was, in fact, the biggest carrot that Tammany possessed. And Tammany is like the political machine back in the day that started in the 1700s and ended in the early, like, they elected someone in New York City in like the 1920s, I was reading. So it was around for a long time. More than 10,000 of the 50,000 city employees were at that level. And while the base pay for grade 5 was $3,260 a year, in itself a handsome wage when the average clerical worker in private industry earned $2,100 a year, the earnings of many of the 10,000 had raised to 6,500 or even 7,500. Under Moses' system, I'm so curious what that would be in today's dollars. I'm looking it up. Let's see what $6,500 in 1919-ish. What? $6,500 in 1919 today. Okay. That would be like a city employee making $116,000. Pretty handsome wage. But it's not like crazy, like it's not millions. Under Moses' system, all civil service workers at grade 5, all 10,000 of them, would have their pay reduced to $3,260 a year and would have to pass examinations for any future raises. Even if they passed the examinations, they would have to climb back up the monetary ladder one step at a time, for promotions were to be given only level by level. And examinations would no longer be given, as they had been, to cozy groups of 2 or 3 competitors, or to one man who happened to be the only person who had been notified that the examination was being given. To climb back up to their former salaries, grade 5ers would be competing with hundreds of applicants. I can see how they would be very mad about that. As the realization of these facts began to seep down to the mass of civil service employees, there was hysteria in the ranks. Protest meetings were arranged. This kind of reminds me, I worked in Chicago a couple years ago at this school, and it was like flagged as a turnaround school because it had been underperforming, the test scores had been. And so a few years before I started working there, they fired every single staff member that was a teacher. And so then a lot of the teachers ended up working for other schools after that. But yeah, it was really crazy because I was working at this school that was an old building. It had been around for decades and decades. The building was built in the 1920s or something in Chicago, but the only staff member who had been there for more than a few years was the lunch lady. She was the only one that stuck around. And it was a really weird feeling because it was like, all right, this is a brand new school, but it's an old school, and the kids were the same. The kids remembered before. Weird. And it sounds like they're doing that in the city government a little bit. Young Bob Moses volunteered to speak at the meetings. He wasn't ashamed of his system, he said. He was proud of it. He would be glad to defend it. But Moses wasn't at Oxford anymore. The only effect of his courage was to make things easier for his enemies. Civil service reorganization was a subject so complicated that it was difficult to interest even civil service workers in it. What was needed was a single visible object on which the workers could focus their hatred. And now Moses had given them such an object, himself. He was the perfect target. Tall, in a white suit, elegant, haughty, arrogant instead of conciliatory when challenged, he stood before the thousands of sullen, clerkish men like the very epitome of the efficiency expert they feared and hated, and they expressed their hatred and fear in boos and catcalls and vicious shouted insults. I really wish, Robert Caro puts in a lot of delicious details, but I really wish he had given us some of the 1910s vicious insults. Would have loved that. What I don't really understand is how does this system relate to his views on rule by aristocracy? It seems like this is quite a different approach to what he wanted for the US in his PhD thesis. Yeah, isn't that weird? And at Yale, remember, he was really big at Yale about the officers of the class shouldn't be fraternity members who know people. It should be a meritocracy, which is similar to what he's doing here. But then in his thesis, he was saying that it should only be university educated men that are leading the government, which feels like more of a I don't know. I suppose maybe it's, yeah, it's kind of a weird relationship there. Moses refused to quit. Night after night, carrying a heavy leather briefcase crammed with facts and statistics he almost never got to use, he stood before civil service employees associations, speaking into a hail of abuse. Once you saw him on those nights, you could never forget him, Kaplan recalls. Tall, handsome, he'd get up on the podium and go right to bat. He wouldn't pull his punches or try to modify the things he was saying so they'd be less unpopular. Those people had come to hate the word efficiency. Talking efficiency to them was waving the red flag before the bull. But in those speeches, it was at efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. The more they booed him, the more self confident, even arrogant he seemed. In the worst of it, he went right on talking and with the attitude, when I say this is it, this is it. But the outspokenness and the courage, along with the arrogance and a lecturing tone, had no effect other than to increase the opposition to his system, to rouse the fury of 50,000 voting men and women to fever pitch. Tammany knew how to use the opportunity he had given it. While not openly opposing reorganization, it linked the plan with the man the employees hated. Recalls one observer, reclassification became Moses in these people's eyes. The employees' associations began to circulate petitions calling for the removal of Moses and the men who had appointed him, Moskowitz and James. And those petitions, bearing tens of thousands of names, were submitted to the Board of Estimate. But still, Tammany made no overt move. Still, the tiger waited. Okay, I have to stir my onions again. I don't know if you were here before 10 minutes ago, but I'm making like French onion soup recipe thing. And so I'm browning onions, but I have to stir them because I'm afraid they're gonna burn. Here I am in my kitchen. Field trip. Oh, they're looking so good. I'm only gonna let them cook a little bit longer. Maybe I'll do like 10 more minutes of reading-ish. And then, yep, onion break number 2. They're looking really brown, potentially a little bit burned. Look at this. Also, sorry, I need to wipe down my stove. Okay. Looking decent. I'm gonna turn the heat down a little bit, maybe. Okay, timer. Okay, great. Back to the book. Also, my cat has been really cute in the background. I don't know if you could tell, but that's a cat right there. Then there began to be doubts about Moses' proposals in the camp of his supporters. Even the most ardent had misgivings about telling men who had become accustomed to making and supporting their families on $6,500 to $7,500 a year that they were now making half of that, $3,260 a year. Even the adoring Kaplan said, "That was a little unfair, really." It's crazy how, like, I mean, going from in today's dollars, $115,000 a year to like $60,000 a year, and you have a whole family. That is a little crazy. That's a little crazy of a change. But don't adversely affect people who had been working. What? Oh, okay. Even the adoring Kaplan said, quote, "That was a little unfair, really. Put in a new system, okay, but don't adversely affect people who had been working under the old system." Not everyone who was making a good salary in grade 5 was doing so just because of political connections, remember. Some had worked their way up on their own. And a lot of the people who had been given their chance through politics were doing good jobs and deserved the money. You shouldn't suddenly take it away from them, unquote. Henry Moskowitz, declaring that, quote, "No one can deny the soundness and the justice of the principle of standardization," said nonetheless that a ruthless application of the principle is unwise. In my judgment, it should be gradually assimilated and applied to the vacant positions as they arise. But Moses argued against compromise. If the principle behind his system was right, he said, there should be no compromising with it. Making exceptions, he said, would kill the whole plan. If the plan was based on salary standardization, then salaries really had to be standard, all salaries. Moskowitz gave in. Some reformers, considering the commission unreasonable, turned lukewarm in their support. It was the moment Tammany had been waiting for. The Board of Estimate, it controlled scheduled hearings on the standardization proposal. The support Moses expected from Mitchell seemed forthcoming at first. Mitchell is the mayor, the new mayor. The mayor and Fusion Comptroller, that's a crazy title. The mayor and the Fusion Comptroller. I'm doing a Google break. Fusion Comptroller. Is that a real thing? Not really. Very little came up. But there's a comptroller in New York City which promotes the financial health of the government. Okay. It sounds like a train term, but apparently it's not. Okay, the comptroller's name is William A. Prendergast. He urged the board to adopt standardization and cut to the bone unnecessary positions. But Tammany packed the hearings with Moses's opponents. Rising to defend his plan, a tall, slim figure in white, among the red-faced, burly, cigarette-smoking Tammany politicians in their black derbies that they wore even indoors, he could hardly be heard through the booze. Speaker after speaker related stories of particularly deserving individuals whose standard of living would be reduced unfairly under that plan. Crazy that he's wearing like a white suit, like a Bermuda white suit. That's a crazy move. Gradually, Tammany's strategy became apparent. Each disputed case, the speakers were saying, should be decided on its individual merits by the board's Bureau of Standards and included as a separate item in the budget, a policy which would not only drag out the hearings indefinitely, but would in itself defeat the principle of universal standardization. The Tammany members of the board said that after careful consideration, they didn't see how any other policy could be adopted. Humane considerations, fairness, justice, these must not be ignored. They were in favor of standardization, they said. They intended to adopt the Moses Plan, but the plan must be modified where individual situations required it. Even pro-fusion newspapers couldn't find anything to criticize in that. If I had a train, you best believe it'd have a comptroller. Mitchell and Prendergast became noticeably silent. When a vote was taken, it was unanimous. Mitchell and Prendergast joined with Tammany to vote for individual consideration. Wow. Moses was disappointed, but still hopeful. The board had, after all, said it intended to adopt standardization. Once the plan was adopted, the exceptions could be granted. Once the plan was adopted, the exceptions could gradually be eliminated one by one. But the hearings dragged on and on. There were, after all, hundreds of civil service workers who believed, many with reason, that the proposal reclassification was unfair to them. Their stories made good newspaper copy. Technical arguments for reclassification did not. The Moses proposal began to appear in an unfavorable light. After weeks of hearings, the Bureau of Standards finally submitted its recommendations to the Board of Estimate, which therefore adopted a budget including Moses's proposed schedule of civil service grades and salaries, along with hundreds of individual budget items for the individual workers who had persuaded the Board of Standards they should be excluded from the schedule. In what was expected to be a matter of routine, the new schedule then went to the Board of Aldermen for approval, and the aldermen vetoed portions of it and added to it dozens of general civil service levels which did not correspond to any levels in the Moses Plan. At the end of 1915, the only real result of Moses's effort was still the stacks of yellow form cards. 1916 was frustration and disillusionment. To meet the aldermen's objections to some of the specific job specifications and salary scales, Moses worked endlessly revising them, only to find when he resubmitted them that the aldermen had still other objections which they had somehow neglected to mention before. There was again no opposition, nothing that Moses's supporters could seize on as evidence of Tammany opposition to reform. Instead, there was again stalling and obfuscation and confusion, and for Bob Moses, defeat. Even the efficiency rating forms of which he had been so proud were turning into symbols of frustration. Attempts to persuade more departments to use them proved fruitless. Roaming relentlessly through the commission offices, he had to look every day at the pile of boxes containing the forms, and the pile never got smaller. I watched a documentary a long time before I even started this book, maybe a couple of years ago, about Robert Caro and his editor, Robert Gottlieb, who had also edited a bunch of really famous books from the 20th century. Like, I remember he is the one who edited the book Catch-22, and before it was going to be Catch with a different number, but then Gottlieb, the editor of this book as well, had suggested 22 because he liked how it sounded, and now Catch-22 is like a common phrase for whenever you're in a difficult situation. Anyway, though, I remember in the documentary, one thing that was like so stunning was that this book, I think they had to cut it in half. Like, he originally wrote 2,000 pages and then they had to cut it to 1,000. My numbers might be off, but they had to cut so much. And when we're in chapters like this, like, frankly, it's just like, it's kind of the rating system is like relatively interesting, but it's just been a lot of talk about the rating system. This is where I'm like, okay, maybe you could have cut a little more. Sorry if that's sacrilegious. I know many people think this book is a masterpiece, but it's a lot of info about the efficiency rating plan of 1915. Okay, anyway. The forms that had been distributed were not being used properly. Most of the department heads who had accepted them were reluctant to do the vast amount of work that would be necessary if their many squares and blanks were to be filled in with precise arithmetical grades. Those few who were willing to do the work needed help in using the new system. To provide this help, and to make sure that all departments were using the new salary scales and that employees were doing the work consistent with their salaries, the Civil Service Commission had to rely on its examiners. The enforcement of Moses' system was in their hands, and these were men from the old Tammany regime who, too smart to give Moskowitz and James grounds for dismissal by openly defying them, undermined the system by the subtle but effective tactic of slowness and learning and laxness in enforcing the new rules. Moses understood full well that the examiners were making a farce out of his system. Nothing, he said bitterly, can make a salary standardization more ridiculous than to put it in the hands of such men. But it was in their hands, nonetheless, that it remained. Judges, he learned, were men too, for all their black robes, and often they were men who had been dressed in those robes by Tammany. When certain department heads refused to hold competitive examinations for elevator operator positions, that's a fun. That I would love like a game show of that. The commission ordered the operators dismissed. One, who ran an elevator in the Bronx County Courthouse, brought suit to enjoin the dismissal, arguing that because prisoners rode in his elevators on their way to and from courtrooms, his job was sensitive and exceptional. Of course it was, the judge said reassuringly, and granted the injunction. Okay, someone just rang my doorbell, and I have to stir the onions again. I'm gonna. Okay, I'm so sorry to like leave you, but can you just hang out with my cat, and I'm gonna stir the onions and answer the door. Bye. Wow. The onions are so caramelized. I'm gonna die. It's gonna be so good. Also, the person at the door, really sad. It's like really cold in New York right now, and it was like a blustery night, and it was this guy in a scarf and a hat, and he was like, I lost my cat. And then it looks like they have given flyers out to everyone, and it's really cute. It's like in 2 languages. This is very sad, and I really hope they find their cat. Mm. If anyone sees a cat that looks like this, Emmy is her name. Also, now you know the street corner where I live, but I'm leaving soon, and I trust that you guys will not, I don't know, bomb my street or anything. Perpetual soup coming soon. I really want to revive the stew. I can't, I have like a Ziploc of stew in my freezer, so it would like sort of be perpetual. There's really no perpetual stew police that says you can't freeze it for a few months. But yeah, I don't know. I think it would be cool to do it with an actual chef so that it tasted really good. Like the chef can make real stew that's really good and then put my perpetual stuff in it as well. I think that would be fun because it would be like a step up. But yeah, we'll see. The old stew parties happen outside, and right now it's just too cold. Like I just don't think I personally would be willing to like be outside in the 15-degree Fahrenheit weather for 2 hours just standing around. But yeah, game show idea. I have Trevor Noah or a TV personality run a scam email that's actually true. Whoa, that's very interesting. That is really interesting because you would wow, I'm sure that you would end up with like some like really gullible grandma from Nebraska or something. And it could the show could be like a lesson to make sure you're not accidentally incentivizing people to like give money to the scammers. The whole thing can just be a lesson in how ridiculous it is that people ever give money in the first place. That would be fun. You should pitch some I don't really know how you pitch networks, but you should pitch some networks. Yeah, it might teach people a bad lesson, but you can frame it in a way where it's like clear that you shouldn't actually give money to strangers in your inbox. Okay, let's see. The darkening of Bob Moses' optimism occurred against the backdrop of the darkening of America's. Dun dun dun. A new mood was abroad in the land. Quote, our country is at peace with the world at war, had been one of Woodrow Wilson's re-election slogans in 1916. But now the war gods were slogging relentlessly across the Atlantic. The words in the scare headlines were Lusitania and U-boat, and finally, Zimmerman. Who's Zimmerman? I don't know who Zimmerman is. I know that Lusitania is a ship that got sunk, and I know that U-boats, warships. I don't know Zimmerman. Someone should look it up. War, not progress, was on the horizon. Aims changed. The world was to be made safe for democracy. That was a large enough order for even the idealism of youth to handle at one time. In New York City, the fading of idealism on the municipal level had been especially rapid. With reform enthroned in City Hall, not all reformers stayed reformers. Before Mitchell's election, the policy of the Bureau of Municipal Research had been to investigate city government no matter who was running it. But after his election, Cleveland is one of the heads of the bureau in the city that was making sure everyone was spending their money correctly. Cleveland announced, when its friends are in power, a citizen research agency should not publish unfavorable information. That's bad. The city's good government organizations had been much less active. One reason was that they did not want to hurt what they considered the city's last best chance against Tammany. But there was also another reason. As Allen himself put it, Allen is another person at the Bureau of Municipal Research. Silent criticism and public applause cannot be too badly stated or too vividly remembered. Namely, almost every agency of outside criticism, quote, had its feet in the trough, to use a conventional term for sharing in political patronage. To use a conventionalized term for sharing in okay, sorry, I read the same line twice. Moses could hardly have been unaware that while he was fighting to bring all civil service positions under competitive examination, no fewer than 47 Charities Department inspectors had been appointed by reformer John Kingsbury without examination, in clear violation of the law. Or that every one of the 47 had previously worked for the private organization which Kingsbury had headed. Moses must have known, as all City Hall observers knew, that city offices ranging from clerkships to judgeships were being filled by reformers from lists furnished by pro-fusion ward leaders. We haven't had the word fusion since the fusion, whatever it was called. The thing that you guys think is a train part. What was it called? The fusion comptroller. I really, this is a masterpiece of a book. I'm not doubting that, but I need to know a few definitions. Like, what is a fusion comptroller? Tell me more about Tammany Hall. I feel like they assumed we knew a lot more about Tammany Hall than I did, at least. Yeah. Okay. Well, back to that. Moses's idol had developed a case of galloping clay feet. John Perroy Mitchell's elegance had worked against him. Wearer of the dress suit, winner of the one-step contest at costume balls of the 400. Oh, the 400, I've talked about this before, but I'm just going to tell you again the quick version because I read about it one time. I was researching like where the names of streets in New York came from because often it's from like really rich people that I don't know, were famous around the times that streets were being built, which was largely right around 1900 when the city was getting a lot bigger in terms of population. And all the fancy people were in a club called the 400, which one woman, Mrs. Astor, she kept a list of. And it was kind of like a secret list that one time did get published. But it was sort of like I have a list of the 400 most respected people in New York City. And the reason it was 400 is because that is how many people could fit in her ballroom for parties. And so it was this exclusive club of 400 people. And their names, when you read the list, it's on Wikipedia. If you're in New York City or if you know anything about New York, the last names are very familiar because their names are streets and their names are buildings, and it's pretty crazy. And they were really like they did not like immigrants really. Even like the people that now we consider white, like they were really big on being like, oh, Italians aren't white, and so you can't be in our club. And obviously, like anyone that's black or Latino was definitely not going to be in their club, but they didn't let Jews in. They didn't even let like some of the railroad people who had been new money. For them, the 400, they were like, oh, like you're new money, you can't join our club. They didn't like Catholics. They were like, that type of vibe. But sorry, that was too much of an aside. But then if you know O. Henry, who's written a lot of famous short stories, he has a book that's called The 4 Million. And the idea was supposed to be like his stories are from everyday people, not the super rich, super exclusive clubs. We're talking about ordinary people. Okay, anyway, that's the 400. All right. So the new mayor, Mitchell, his independence had worked against him too. Scornful of public relations, he refused to change his friendships or even go to the public with explanations of many of his actions as mayor, so that many of the notable reforms he initiated never got the publicity they deserved. His investigations cut waste in city government, but preoccupied with economy, he did not want to do anything with the money thus saved, but save it. His boasts were not of what was being done to meet the city's needs, but of what was being done to save the city's money. Even his admiring biographer would have to admit, quote, his concern was for the city rather than for its people, unquote. What probably disillusioned Moses most about Mitchell was not the boy mayor's elegance, but his proposed solution of the problem of the railroad tracks below Riverside Drive. Riverside Drive was a big, like, dump type park that Robert Moses really wanted to fix. Mitchell proposed giving the New York Central exclusive control of the West Side waterfront and allowing the railroad to cure the Death Avenue problem by elevating its tracks below 59th Street, a move that would have permanently blighted a large slice of downtown Manhattan. Sorry, I just have to reread that. I didn't understand it. Giving the New York Central exclusive control of the West Side waterfront and allowing the railroad to cure the Death Avenue problem by elevating its tracks. I still don't really understand what that means. I'm assuming that the train went from being on the ground and then he wanted it to be elevated. But that would have blighted a lot of lower Manhattan. Still not quite sure what's going on here. In return for those favors, Mayor Mitchell asked the railroad to pay $300,000, an amount not even sufficient to rehabilitate Riverside Park. A furious citizens union called the plan a giveaway. Stop talking about comptrollers. Called the plan a giveaway to a railroad owned by Mitchell's social friends. And it was. And the mayor's plan would have forever deprived the city of the waterfront highway and park Moses had dreamed of. In the area of civil service, however, Mitchell was Moses's best hope. The mayor promised to press again in 1917 for standardization and reclassification. After more than 3 years of unremitting work on the technicalities of civil service, Moses was still fascinated by them and by the potentiality for public good in their improvement. They are not dry and dull, as some may suppose from reading printed salary schedules, he wrote in 1917. Quote, a student who wishes to see government as a whole will find no more interesting study that is afforded by a standardization program. He was still confident. Quote, I believe that the final results of the work in New York City will be regarded as entirely satisfactory, he said. Why shouldn't they be? Hadn't he demonstrated over and over again by logic and by science that his system would improve the city's government? Didn't all the city's top officials now understand this? Quote, a second and revised edition of the standard specifications is about to be published for the Board of Estimate, he said. Presumably, this will be the final edition. The final edition? Galahad thought he was in sight of the Grail. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I was really hoping that I would get to page 88, which is where section 3 starts, the rise to power. But I think I really have to make dinner because the onions are brown now and my voice is tired. Okay, so we're at the top of page 84. I'll probably read again tomorrow. And yeah, thanks to people for having a really fun chat today. I was laughing at the comptrollers. I will have a good dinner. Thanks. I will enjoy the soup so much. Also, there's Pearl. Wait, no, where'd she go? She's not here anymore. Oh well. Bye. Have a good night. Happy Saturday.